Okay, looks like the time is 1:20. Hopefully everyone's back. We will be moving along to the Chapter 11 presentation, Geotechnical Environmental Requirements, presented by Mike Krajewski, leader of our technical services group. I'll hand it over to Mike now. Mike. Don't forget to unmute yourself before you begin.
I'm sorry, do you see my screen?
Yes, sir. We see your screen and we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks everyone for attending the presentation for the IDM this afternoon. This is the list of major revisions to Chapter 11. However, if you go through the red lines that Mr. Garza was talking at the beginning of the presentation, you're going to see some more maybe revisions that they are just mostly rewarding and clarification. However, I will discuss these items in details going forward. The Chapter 11 is now organized into sections for easier navigations and referencing, as you see the previous and the now version. New sections have been added. One is section 1, actually, is geotechnical and environmental overview, which is just for the referencing and definitions. And we have added section 4, which is minimum engineer of records, efforts, and drawing requirements. 3 definitions have been added and 1 has been revised. We revised the definition of environmental consultant to a consultant who is practicing in the environmental field, which is right over here. The environmental consultant on the previous version was basically that's the definition that we have for environmental professionals. These are the 3 definitions that have been added. One is for geotechnical baseline report, environmental professional definition, and the potentially petroleum contaminated area PPCA. We have added additional requirement for geotechnical fault study. We have added estimated vertical and horizontal movement, horizontal fault movement, just to better define the fault movement, if any. We revised the depth of continuous sampling for tunnels. We increased the continuous sampling for tunnels from 1 bore diameter to 2 and minimum of 6 feet to 12 feet above the crown and below the inward depth of the tunnel zone. This gives us more information on soil in the tunnel zone, and that's good for the contractors too. We revised the depth of continuous sampling for tunneling. We reduced the boring minimum distance for tunnels and microtunnels from 500 feet to 200 feet in order to have a better soil profile for tunneling projects. We also reduced the boring depth of tunnel shafts from 1.5 times the shaft diameter to 1 time shaft diameter below the bottom of the shaft. However, we kept the minimum depth at 30 feet below the bottom. We also increased the boring depth for a street paving project from 5 feet to 10 feet. We have added additional requirement for boring survey. The boring survey information shall meet the minimum technical standards set forth in the City of Houston IDM Chapter 13, Section 5. Next speaker, Ms. Phyllis, will talk about these requirements in detail. I'm going to refer to these changes, I guess, several times as we are going forward. We have revised the aggressivity test requirement. We removed the pipe type. We were just doing aggressivity test for the metallic pipes. We removed that, and now we are requiring that for all different kinds of types. That is give us information in case of high concentration of sulfate and chloride in the soil, in case. We added additional recommendation for tunnels and shafts. If the shaft is expected to be within the PPCA, then geotechnical consultant shall include recommendation other than dewatering in the report. For example, sheet piling. Sometimes it's not feasible to dispose of large amount of contaminated groundwater. So we want this option in the report in case if we need to use it. We have added additional requirement to geotechnical report. The summary of laboratory tables shall be as specified in IDM Chapter 13, Section 5. We have also added geotechnical baseline report, GBR, in this section. We may require GBR for tunneling and micro-tunneling projects on a case-by-case basis. For example, that will be needed for major structures, bridges, and major bayous. GBR also must be conducted in general accordance with the guidelines in the latest version of ASCE publications. We have revised some of the requirements for ESA1 report. To be more specific, we added Sanborn for fire insurance maps. We also removed shall not exceed from the scale requirements of the section. So basically it's going to be between 1 inch to 500 feet and 1 inch to 700 feet. And we added Texas hazardous waste site and Texas state Superfund sites. We added to the regulatory record search. There are more revisions for ESA1. We added the electronic copy of the report shall be in PDF format, and the Phase 1 ESA report shall be formatted according to latest ASTM E1527, Section 12. We revised one item in the field activities for ESA2. Now we are requiring all soil samples to be screened using photoionization detector, which is a PID. That give us, give the consultant better idea, level of the contamination for sending the samples to the lab. We revised the requirement for boring log locations. Now the boring log location and information shall be delivered in a digital format that meets IDM Chapter 13, Section 5. Again, next speaker, Ms. Peters, is going to talk about these requirements. We have added additional requirement for ESA2 reports. PPCA allowing the alignment shall begin and end at a clean boring. If the PPCA cannot determine a station to a station at the REC location, then the environmental professional shall inform the EOR and project manager for additional work. Exhibit requirements for the report has been revised. Boring location and log information shall be delivered in digital format according to IDM Chapter 13, Section 5. Requirements for EOR has been revised. Again, we added the boring survey information shall meet the minimum technical standards set forth in IDM Chapter 13, Section 5. We have added geotechnical drawing requirements and precast the storm manhole foundation to EOR level of efforts. The engineer of record shall include geotechnical boring information in the drawings if both the project scope requires for construction of tunnel shafts greater than 30 feet deep and the contract document utilized City of Houston standard spec 02400. Graphic requirement and example sheets are presented in IDM Chapter 3. Mr. Luis Garza, at the beginning of the presentation, just talk about this, and he showed you where the sheets are and what the requirements are. Also, the engineer of record shall select the foundation type and provide the information to the contractor in contract documents. This concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, please put it in chat. Thank you.
All right, Mike, let's get these questions prepared. Okay, first question. Shafts in PPCA. Where should the engineer's recommendations for methods other than dewatering be made? On the drawings, in the geotechnical report, or with the city project manager?
Good question. The recommendation will be made by geotechnical engineer in the geotechnical report. This recommendation will be used by EOR and the contractor in case dewatering is not a feasible method, for the project. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. A second question, when the environmental professional informs the engineer of record more borings are needed to be made due to unclear determination of PPCA station limits, who will the engineer of record notify for the additional locations to be sampled?
Well, since environmental professional is the sub-consultant to the EOR, he's informing the EOR, and EOR will contact the city project manager, and that the work need to be done. However, I think this is just mostly for budgeting purposes to see if how they can budget that.
Okay, thank you. We have another question.
Okay.
Do you still update soil boring log sheets in GIMS maps?
Talking about our, yes, we do that. We have more than 20,000 borings in GIMS maps.
And those are still being updated?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I believe that's all the questions, so we can move on to our next presentation now.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Thank you, Mike. We'll be moving on to Chapter 13, GIS Data Digitization Standards. That will be presented by Ms. Ekaterina Fitos, part of Houston Water Planning Group. Take it over, Ekaterina.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'll be briefing you on the revisions made to Chapter 13, GIS Data Digitization Standards. This chapter focuses on digital data deliverables and formatting with focus on geospatial data deliverables. GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems, which assists us in modeling the real world using data. The City of Houston has adopted GIS technologies in order to store, manage, and maintain spatially related geographic data. Houston Public Works stores its geospatial data in an enterprise geodatabase, which is a centralized data storage structure, which allows for efficient data delivery, data management, and reliability. Geospatial data, which is utilized in a GIS system, is integral to analysis and data-driven decision-making. By promoting enterprise database storage, information is more widely available, and data-driven decisions can be made through digital data solutions with focus on analytics. Understanding this dynamicism and focus, Chapter 13 of the City Design Manual was developed to guide contractors and design consultants in developing and delivering geospatial data for public infrastructure like CIPs and DPCs. The guidelines are meant to create consistency and maintain GIS data compatibility between project deliverables. The changes made to Chapter 13 include the addition of a new section, Section 5. Section 5 addresses the digital submission requirements for geotechnical and environmental projects. This section translated the traditional data submitted into a PDF report format for environmental and geotechnical studies to require the more dynamic and flexible digital formats. Within Section 5, there are two primary data submission requirements, one for boring points and the other is the boring log test result table. There are a few digital data formats described in Section 5 to afford the user with more flexibility in the delivery of digital data. The formats include geodatabase, comma-delimited file, or Excel spreadsheet. The preference is for the consultant to deliver the data in a file geodatabase. However, these other digital formats will be accepted. For all boring point data collected and reported on, the coordinate system is to be State Plane Texas South Central Zone 4204. With the horizontal datum as North American Datum 1983 or NAD 83 and the vertical datum as NEBD 88. And the units will be in feet. Additionally, the horizontal accuracy of the borings shall meet or exceed sub-meter accuracies of 2 feet horizontal RMSE. If digital data is selected as the deliverable format, the following highlights the required database schema that should be followed. The geodatabase is a storage container of the geospatial data. It should contain 5 key elements, a feature data set that organizes the feature classes, domains, which are predefined list of codes and values, a point feature class of the geoborings, a table containing geoboring test results, and a one-to-one relationship class relating the test results back to the geoboring point data. The feature class has specific attributes that need to be populated and contained within the feature class. Here we show table 13-46 and table 13-47 illustrating the feature class and the table attributes. Refer to these tables for the specific data schema requirements. As mentioned earlier, with the addition of Section 5, we added 3 domain values to Chapter 13. The 3 coded values are shown here and can be further referenced in tables 13-48 through 13-50. If tabular data is selected as the deliverable format, the following tables highlight the required format to deliver for an Excel spreadsheet or comma-delimited text file that should be followed. Note the tabular data mimics previously delivered reports. Shown here is the header for a typical report that would be submitted in PDF format. You can see that in the digital Excel workbook or CSV table, the format is more streamlined so that it can be ingested into the Enterprise GIS database. Furthermore, the formatting in the column headings are simplified to meet this purpose. For the most part, the same data is being delivered as what was previously delivered, just in a more streamlined format. Similarly, figure 11.12 shows the previous test results versus the current CSV or Excel format. Refer to table 13-46 and 13-47 illustrating the tabular attributes for the borings and the test result data, and refer to these tables for the specific data schema requirements. One other item included in Section 5 is the inclusion of table 13-56, which highlights further the checklist of attributes for feature class and the tabular data. Lastly, as mentioned previously within Section 5, we have provided a variety of options for deliverable formats. We mentioned the Excel or CSV is acceptable for the boring locations and test results. However, the geodatabase format is preferred delivery format. It is important to stress and make note that shapefiles will not be accepted as a valid submission format. Lastly, the city will further define the delivery method during project planning. With that, this concludes the revisions made to Chapter 13 with the inclusion of Section 5. I want to thank you for your time, and with that, are there any questions in the chat that we need to address?
Thanks, Ekaterina. No, there has been a couple questions that have come in, so let me get those ready for you. All right, first question. When will GIMS move to something other than Internet Explorer, which isn't supported by Microsoft anymore?
That's a great question. My section does not handle that particular application. That is our ITGIS for Houston Public Works. However, I can tell you that the transition to a new platform is coming very soon, within the next, actually, I believe the last estimate was sometime this month. So it is coming relatively soon for it to be published. Although if you'd like a more exact date, we can coordinate. If you contact me or the organizer of this event, we can get you a more specific date. But yeah, so that particular application will be in more of a supported format other than Internet Explorer. And that is a GeoCortex, GeoLink kind of is the application that will be instituted.
Thank you. Another question here. All GIS requirements for all types of city infrastructure currently in the IDM Chapter 13, or are there some additional requirements outside of Chapter 13?
So Chapter 13 focuses primarily on the water, wastewater, and stormwater systems, with Section 5 obviously addressing more of the geotechnical and environmental reports. Chapter 13 is up for revision this year, and we anticipate that as other chapters within the IDM are revised and there's applicable digital data or GIS data deliverables that are identified, that Chapter 13 will be updated accordingly. One additional note is that the city is migrating to the Esri utility network model, and the deliverables will need to be formatted to meet this new schema. So we definitely see Chapter 13 will take into account this migration and other GIS data needs into account, and will be modified accordingly in the future.
All right, thank you for that answer. One more question. On the GIS definition slide, how will the format be defined? Will the city project manager help with the type of format that will be accepted?
So recall that Chapter 13, Section 5 has a variety of formats that can be accepted, from tabular CSV and Excel to geospatial file geodatabase format. The format for the deliverables is flexible to account for the differences between contractors and their abilities to deliver geospatial data. That being said, the city project manager will work with the consultant to help identify the appropriate format to be delivered for a project.
Great, thank you. I believe that concludes all of our questions for Chapter 13. So we can move on now.
Ross, before you move on, Ekaterina, do you have anything you'd like to add? Just an opportunity to add, any statement or any comment when it comes to Chapter 13?
Yeah, so Chapter 13 is really an integral chapter, because with it, it's requiring digital deliverables for a lot of the data that we were seeing traditionally, like static delivery, either in PDF or, sometimes just submitted on paper. So ultimately, the trend and the initiative is to get these digital deliverables in so that we can ingest the information in a more standardized format and be able to focus our attention more on less data entry and less on data conversion, more on the actual quality of the data, and making sure that things are more widely available and available in a timely manner. So the importance of Chapter 13 is trying to get everything in alignment with the other chapters in the IDM to make sure that those data sets that have been more static, if we can get them delivered in a digital format, then we can begin analyzing and making those data sets more widely available for business use and to make better decisions. So it is a very integral part of the IDM.
I have another question to Katerina. Do you see Chapter 13 as I guess one of the elements that the city is using to try to bridge the gap between requirements from different service lines? I know at one time you had discussed, that some of the data is maybe siloed in some different areas. Do you see Chapter 13 as helping to reduce that?
Yes. So our goal is to start building up enterprise data sets as best we can. And that means avoiding people or even departments or sections having more local data and having it more available at the enterprise level, which is why the GIS enterprise data sets come into play. And also thinking a little bit past what is a traditional data set that has been available, historically through GIS or at the city. We want to make sure that they're more widely available. So part of that initiative really means that the data has to be in a format that is more readily available and stored in one of those enterprise kind of systems or architecture. So yeah, breaking down the data silos, making it so that you can do those data-driven decisions. So the data has to be kind of available more or less, in real time. Make it so that it's available when we receive it, kind of thing. So that we make the best and the most readily available information kind of available for people to make decisions on.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for all the work that you're a part of on the GIS side. I think it's something that's sorely needed by the city, and I think we all would like to be able to work a little bit easier together when it comes to each service line in Houston Public Works. So thank you.
You're welcome. Most definitely helps us share information. That's why we're here. And there is one other thing that I would like to note is that as people work with the project managers to deliver the type of format that is to be delivered, the other item is that we are working to develop templates so that we can provide to the consultant, here's a template geodatabase with the schema kind of set up in there, and also for like an Excel spreadsheet, here's kind of the standard template that you can use. We are working to put some of those items and those tools in place to help people as well.
So Ross, has there been any other questions that have come in as this discussion's been going on?
Yeah, two. I believe Katerina just answered one, which was, are you going to provide digital data sheets for consultants to use? I believe she covered that just now. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then another question that came in was, how often do you update the data in GIMS?
So the data in GIMS,
when it's been updated.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you, so how
often do you update, and is there a way to tell when it's last been updated?
So there's multiple data that's actually being serviced in GIMS. It's not just the geotechnical data, just to kind of clarify that. So every night we provide replicas to that system for IT to ingest into the GIMS application. So, and when I say we, Houston Water GIS, which is responsible for the water and the wastewater systems. So every night the replicas run, they get pushed forward. So a lot of this data, depending on the layers that you're referencing, are, very current. So it really would depend on what data you might be referencing as to the frequency of update. And the metadata is probably going to be your best bet to get some clarification on that. And if by chance, if you have specific questions on a particular data set that you are referencing and you're curious about the currentness, by all means, reach out to me. If my section isn't responsible for it, I can find you at least a contact or get you, in contact with someone that can answer that question for you.
Okay, thank you. think with that, there's no more questions. We'll be moving on to the next presentation. So next presentation will be Chapter 9, Stormwater Design and Water Quality Requirements. This will be presented by Dr. Kathleen Zhang Bullock, part of the Houston Permitting Center, Office of the City Engineer. Take it over, Kathleen. Kathleen, you're muted. If you begin presenting. There we go.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathleen Bullock with the Office of City Engineer, City of Houston. And I'm glad to be able to share with you some of the changes of the IDM just published. Since Chapter 9 is not in the review cycle, but in this after the Harvey, we know that what we have to change. And so it's a very first stage of it. What we do is we go ahead and change the rainfall intensity. So this rainfall intensity, that what we do in very beginning, what we have is, because you can see terminal concentration is still the same equation, and A is for the in the area of the acre. And what about the I? What about the intensity? And the intensity is based on the changes of the B and D and E. So when B and D and E increase tremendously, then your intensity increase also. So what we want to make sure is all the design engineer that you will follow this new table, which is not new, it's 2 years new. This table so you can come up with the intensity, so then we can do your storm sewer calculations. After the intensity changed, then we publish the IDF curve, which is from the 2 years to a 500 year. And this IDF curve revision is based on the Atlas 14 with Region 3's data. And city has using this data, and city decide that this is a Region 3's data that we're going to use. So we got several people ask, can we use the other Region 2's data? And the answer is no. So let's just not try to discuss with that. It doesn't go anywhere. Okay. This slides actually show the pipe size and the placement, how we're going to do this. Well, we didn't really change the language in there. We just move it out down to outside the paragraph, so it'd be more clear. So we would reduce a lot of people try to ask, well, but it didn't say that clearly. It's not in a very obvious place that we didn't know how we need to follow. So on this one, this is only for the single family residential that is right in front of the curb or the ditches. So in front of them, so you can do that. Now, if you say, well, but my development is outside, not in front of this curb, we'll have outside and then go inside, set it in backside of it. And so, or go through other people's property and then go to a ditch, you will not be able to do that. And this is also not for the commercial or shared driveway, PAE, PUE, or access road to use this type of the connection. Now, for a connection point, well, the connection point for the design, you should be other than the true single family residential. And if you have a commercial, then you have shared driveway or not shared driveway, or you have access road, then you will be right behind the inlet, so you can connect to the inlet. So if you have to go next to several blocks and then go into the back of the inlet, no, you are not allowed to do that. Because if you do that, you got a 24 inches pipe in the storm, and then you're in front of the property line and behind the curve, And when you do this 24 inches storm sewer pipe going through the neighbor's property, then the neighbor, if the neighbor redeveloping, and when they try to connect the storm or connect the sanitary sewer especially, they will not have enough space, and then they won't be able to crossing your design storm sewers pipe. This table actually shows you what we have changed on the storm sewer in the capacity. It's pretty big changes. You can see that type C2, originally we have it in the published IDM say 10 cubic feet, but now it's at 15. So make sure that before you do the design, make sure how you calculate it shows the CFS, and this is the design capacity you should use, not go to the old design standard. Now, a lot of people did ask that, well, if we design the outfall, okay, so if we are outfalling into the Harris County directly, so we don't have to follow CT's design requirement. The answer is no. If you are outfalling, even if you are outfalling into Harris County TxDOT, Harris County Flood Control, or any other agency, then we still have the language in there to say the more restrictive criteria shall govern. So just look at which one is more restrictive, then that's what you should use. Well, what about the stormwater detention? Let's even create more different opinion from the different engineer firm or from the property owner. So we actually stay in there to say if the detention criteria has a conflict with Harris County Flood Control District, Harris County, or TxDOT, the more restrictive criteria should govern. And one of the important thing is that cities no longer allow the timing analysis to avoid detention requirement. In way back, before today, before this year, before today, before last year, we have a lot of analysis coming to say use the time analysis, and they will show zero detention required. Most of those projects were right next to Bayou, right next to Lake Houston. So we have so many of those that is in the system that they do not require any other detention way back. Now, I want to share with all of you, and I've been telling a lot of people and over and over again. So I think this will be best if I just share with this audience that when we said no detention is required, remember some of you probably can memorize that, less than 15,000 square feet, less than 65%, then no detention is required. But no detention is required does not equal to no storm discipline review is required. We have a huge group of the storm reviewer in here that what they review is they review the grading, they review the elevation, they review the sheet flow within the private property, the roof drain, the swells, and the detention. So I said, and the detention. So other than the detention, if detention is not required, they still need to review the grading, review the elevation. And so why do we want to do that? We do that is because so any of the development, I know they are less than 15,000 square feet, they are less than 65%, and we want to make sure that they do not sheet flow to their neighbor property. So the neighbor, after your construction or after the new construction going up, the neighbor will not keep calling us to complain about my neighbor building this new house and all the sheet flow to my backyard and flood my backyard or flood my house. So we will reduce a lot of those complaints. The next slide I want to share with you is what are we looking at? You know, this is a pre-development and post-development. But if we have the post-development plus the detention, and you can see when you have the post-development plus the detention, okay, so it's not going to have that peak anymore because it smooths out. It smooths out to the further time. So this would be discharge. If we can do a controlled discharge, then that would be better for us. detention requirement. Why do we need to have a detention? Well, the detention, the intent of a detention is to mitigate the effect of the new development, redevelopment, or site modification on the existing drainage system. So when we have the detention in there, we can mitigate those after or post-development result. But this detention requirement right now is based on the acreage of disturbed area that result in the impervious surface. Remember way back 2018, before September, that our detention requirement is counting for the increase of impervious cover. So nowadays, what we constantly hear people say, yeah, but you know, the impervious cover, the concrete in my parking lot, they are exactly the same. Okay, so why do I have to provide detention? Well, because now detention requirement is based on a disturbed area, not you increase or not. Okay, now there's two other conditions we looking at the design. Condition 1 is if you plat, replat, change the use, or subdividing any other tract. So to reduce the storm detention requirement, it's not allowed because we have seen so many of them and coming with a lot. For example, 29,000 square feet. So they subdivided, become 14,900 square feet. So then they say, hey, each one of them are less than 15,000 square feet. So I am, you know, I have less than 15,000 square feet. So I have that 65% exemption. So what we said, condition 1, if you're going through those process, then you will not be allowed to use those 65% of the detention waiver or credit anymore. So that's what it is on the condition number 1. So what we'll do is we'll use the original tract size, right? 29,000 square feet to say, no, you are not falling under that 65%, you cannot use that. Condition number 2 is, at this time, if your development has the area for a common driveway, shared driveway, access easement, 28-foot PAE, the alleys, or any access way that you can call, because they are, majority of them are concrete from one end to the other end. Under this condition 2, you will not be able to use 65% reduction for your detention requirement. So in this case, what do? You use the 0.75 acre-feet per acre multiplied by the entire disturbed area. So it's no 65% exemption. So the next slide, what I try to show is to compare under what condition, what detention requirement would be there that you have to use. So remember that we talk about condition number 1 and condition number 2. You don't subdivide and you don't have shared driveway on those. Then the single family residential, if they are less than 15,000 square feet, and then if they are less than 65%, then you don't have to provide any detention. And that'll be the same thing as the last year's publication. However, if you are larger than 65% with impervious cover, then from 0.2 last year you do, now it's become 0.75. So it's like more than 3 times more that detention you had to provide. And the next one is, well, if you are larger than 15,000 square feet, what do? Well, you just use 0.75. Doesn't matter which way you go, and there's no 65% exemption. Then if you are greater or equal to 1 acre, then you have to use those detention curve, the rate curve, and I'll show you in the next couple of the slides. So it used to be 0.5, now it is 0.75 and more, and 0.75 is the minimum that we can use and we can allow for calculation. And then the last one would be if you're larger or equal to 20 acres, what do? Well, you use HCFCD's policy criteria and the procedure manual, but the minimum requirement, the detention is still 0.75. So you can run the model, run the procedure, and everything else, and come out and say, hey, my result is 0.65, so I'm going to use 0.65. No, you still have to use 0.75. Now, if you are not the single family residential, so you're commercial, then what do? Well, if you are less than 1 acre, it's 0.75. If you are greater than 1 acre or and equal or less than 20 acre, then you use the detention rate curve. And the same, if you are greater than 20 acre, then you follow the HCFCD's policy and criteria and procedure manual. So the minimum is still 0.75. Now, when it's outside city limit, if it's inside the Harris County, or because we don't review them, so you will have to follow Harris County's requirement, right? But if you are outside city's limit, outside Harris County's limit in Montgomery County, in Fort Bend County, then you use more restricted criteria. So I think some of the area was higher than ours, the requirement. Now let me show you the detention rate curve. This is coming out with the number, actually original publication, we only show the percentage, and then it's kind of difficult when somebody try to figure out what is what. So then we put the number in there too, so for you to easy design. So if you look at them, you will see it's from 0.75 all the way to 0.98. So it's 100%, 0.98. There's no, I don't think it's any larger than 100%. So 0.98 would be the maximum we have. This is for any other project that larger or equal to 1 acre and less or equal to 20 acre. So you will use this detention rate curve. And of course, anything you have the exception. And right now, at this time, the exception is on CBD, which is bounded by Highway 10, 45, and 59. And no detention is required. But if you can use any of the low impact development technique, then you should include it in your design. Medical center on TMC. When last year, before we published this 0.75, the medical center in TMC actually come in and discuss at several meetings with the city. So then they come up with a 0.65, which is higher than the 0.5 at that time what we required. And then they would provide for 100% of the entire track size. So it doesn't matter after the construction, they still they are in impervious cover or they are changing to the grassy area, the park, the pond. They will provide overloads with 0.65. So it's 100% of the track size they will provide a detention. And that's one of the exceptions. Over the other area, disturbed area result in the impervious cover, you will have to provide detention at this time. Let me show you that where is the TMC3? Okay, this is a TMC3 boundary. And boundary is very important. You will say, hey, how about if I am on the other side of the Robertson Road? No, you're not inside that boundary, so your detention rate minimum is 0.75, not 0.65 anymore.
Excuse me, Kathleen, this is Luis. I wanted to jump in here to see if we can move to the question section because we're running out of time at the moment.
Yeah, that's my last slide also. That concludes my presentation. Any question?
Yeah, so we do have a few questions here, Kathleen.
Sure.
And so one of the questions, I think there's a question here. Are master plans submitted and approved prior to April 1st, 2021 grandfathered?
Okay. If you are based on the Atlas 14 rainfall, after 2019's design, then the city will allow the development to proceed under the proposed master plan for up to 5 years, but you have to be continuous in the development, continuous design, continuous construction, like it was a phase project. That's the only way you do. But if you are not based on the Atlas 14's rainfall data, then you have to provide a delta, the delta between now use Atlas 14's data and then prior to you use 0.5, how much you provided detention. So those data you will have to provide in your new project.
Okay, Kathleen, there's one question here about new manhole details. I just want to tell the attendees that there's 2 sections coming up that we'll be talking about those. And I say we have time for maybe one more question here, Kathleen. And we'll pick one that may be quick here. What is the status of a fee in lieu of detention?
Okay, the fee in lieu of at this time is still not available to the outside because the director's office and the mayor's office is still working with Harris County together because the mayor want to have we all together, we all together do the same thing. So they are still in the negotiation status.
Okay, Kathleen, there's a few more questions here. We'll have some time at the end of the presentation. Maybe we can address those questions at that time.
All right. Thank you.
So that brings us to Chapter 17, Bicycle Transit and Pedestrian Design Requirements. Our presenter is Ian Lavacek. He's Managing Engineer at the Transportation and Drainage Operations. He's at Transportation Engineering. Ian, take it away.
All right, Luis, thank you very much. You can hear me, right? I'm not muted, am I?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody. Ian Lavacek, as Luis said, in Transportation Drainage Operations, Public Works. Here to talk about this out-of-cycle changes to Chapter 17, our bicycle transit pedestrian design requirements. We actually had this chapter, we also looked at this chapter last year. You might be wondering why we come back again. And this is an acknowledgement of a big event that has happened over the course of this year. It's actually been worked on for several years with the mayor's office and our planning department and Public Works in coordination to look at walkable places and transit-oriented development. These are 2 new ordinances that were passed in August of last year by City Council and have amended Chapter 40 and Chapter 42 of the Code of Ordinances. So I'm talking about Code of Ordinances here in an IDM presentation, and it's going to be hard to. I'm going to try my best to unravel those, but they really are tied very closely together now. And this primarily has to do with sidewalks. And so now we have a lot of sidewalk design elements that are included in the Code of Ordinances and in the IDM too. And so we had to make sure that they were aligned. It's aimed primarily, the changes for walkable places and transit-oriented development are primarily aimed at new development. But like I said, they do have sidewalk standards as well. And as this link at the bottom here is a good place to go for more information on those ordinances that were passed. And of course, you can also just Google for these things too. So talking about a couple of the elements, some of these things haven't changed from the previous years. We still are talking about the pedestrian realm in terms of 3 components: the sidewalk, which is where you walk or you bike, or if you're in a wheelchair, that's where you're going to be going. If you don't. Or at the safety buffer, which is that area between the sidewalk on the street, and the frontage buffer, which is between the right-of-way and the far side of the sidewalk. Those are the same definitions as before, but now we have updated those minimum requirements for each of these components. One thing to note that we've talked in the past about an S dimension, that's still referred to in the IDM. The S dimension is basically the outside the curb dimension. It's related to the pedestrian realm, but it is not always the same as the pedestrian realm, as I will show you here. Talking a little bit about what is allowable in each of these components, that we always want to have a free and unobstructed sidewalk for mobility purposes, but then within the safety and frontage buffers, we're a little bit more open to what can go there. And those components of the pedestrian realm give us places for utilities and streetlights, signal equipment, trees, all of our utilities, all of our underground utilities that we need. That's a good place to put it. It gets it out of the way of the place where people need to be moving, either in the street or on the sidewalk. And it also gives us opportunities for low impact development, stormwater features, and that kind of thing. one of the things that we have clarified this year in the IDM, we have these new figures that really what we're trying to do here is clarify the difference between that Chapter 10 S dimension and the pedestrian realm. And what we're showing here is that what I'm calling the S dimension and the P dimension for pedestrian realm, they can sometimes be the same as what you see on the left side, and that's when the pedestrian realm is 100% in the public right-of-way, when we can meet all of our requirements for the buffers and the sidewalk, then the S and P will be the same. But in those cases where our components for pedestrian realm, the sidewalk and the two buffers, are wider than what we have within the S dimension, then the pedestrian realm has to be achieved through some other kind of means, which could include something like a sidewalk easement shown on the right side with an E, or it could be right-of-way dedication or other means. We provide a little bit more guidance about what's acceptable in each of these areas. Again, the safety buffer, which is that area between the sidewalk and the roadway, we clarify that area can be paved or it can be grass. It can look just like a sidewalk and effectively be a sidewalk, or it can be something completely different. But one thing we do clarify, and we've seen this this question come up quite a bit, that it is not intended for any vehicle uses. And very specifically, if we're looking at cutback parking, that is not something that is compatible with a safety buffer. That would have to be outside of the safety buffer. Looking at some of the very specific changes to our requirements for the buffers, I've shown here what we showed previously in 2020 on the top and what we show on the bottom. In 2020, we had basically all of our standards on one table, and because we're providing a little bit more detail now, and we've broken things up into different sections, now we have different tables for these elements. And so if you compare last year to this year to really what we did for the safety buffer, this is now defined within the Code of Ordinances as a 4-foot minimum, meaning that space between the sidewalk and the passing car has to be at least 4 feet wide to be compatible with Code of Ordinances and the IDM. And you'll see that's up from 0 feet. We defined previously an absolute minimum of 0 feet previously and a desirable of 3. We've completely got rid of the absolute minimum and desirable minimum. Have just gone with minimum. The frontage buffer, which is on the property side, has oh, I'm sorry, I actually read that wrong, but you can see the numbers still. The safety buffer was 2 and 4, and now it is it's the 4 and 6, and the frontage buffer has also come up a little bit. Looking at the sidewalk widths, we have provided a lot more specificity about how wide the sidewalk needs to be in different contexts. Again, on the left is that same table I was just showing, but with a different section highlighted for the different sidewalk width requirements that we previously had. And now in 2021, again, to align this with the design requirements of the walkable places and transit-oriented development ordinances, we have adjusted those to be more specific to the central business district, major thoroughfares, different kinds of major thoroughfares, and then all other streets as well, with our absolute minimum sidewalk width being 5 feet wide. And then on most streets, it'll be 6 feet. And in certain situations, it could be quite a bit bigger, but you'll know about that, particularly the walkable places plan will give you more specificity about what a certain kind of sidewalk needs to be. And transit-oriented development streets, the TOD streets, are different as well, but most streets are going to fall within that 5 or 6 feet requirement. This is a new concept that we've developed this year. This is also in, I believe, Chapter 40. And again, I highlighted that at the top, where in the Code of Ordinances, we're really specifying that this is something in Code of Ordinances, and it impacts both the public right-of-way and private right-of-way. This is actually something that goes a little bit beyond what the IDM normally covers. We included it in the IDM because it does have an impact on the public realm, but then the Chapter 40 covers all the rest of it in the private property. And this idea is that it's really what we're trying to do is for a driveway that's interfacing with a sidewalk, we want to ensure that a driver exiting the driveway has enough visibility to be able to see a pedestrian who's walking on the sidewalk right in front of them. and also for the pedestrian to be able to see a car coming for them so that they can both adjust. Imagine some of the driveways, particularly in some of the high rises downtown, for example, where you'll have a sidewalk right next to a garage door opening, and you'll have a lot of pedestrian traffic and vehicle traffic coming out of the driveway. And what we're doing here is saying you actually have a box that we have defined that will limit what you can put in that if it's in the public or private right of way. The IDM will specify that within that 6x14 box, that on either side of an exiting lane of a driveway, you can't put things that will obstruct visibility. Okay. Another technical change that from last year is that we previously defined specifically the pedestrian realm as well as the components of the pedestrian realm. We had minimums for pedestrian realm, sidewalk safety buffer, and frontage buffer. However, for this year, because the pedestrian realm is the same thing as its components, we have completely taken out the standards for the pedestrian realm and are defining them solely within the minimum requirements of its components, the sidewalk and the 2 buffers. I think that'll just make things a little bit clearer, hopefully. That's not supposed to complicate things, it should make things easier. And then for the pedestrian realm itself, there are certain situations where the Chapter 42 Code of Ordinance actually has specifications for the pedestrian realm requirement. That will, so be aware too, this is outside of the IDM, but what we have really worked hard with is to prioritize sidewalks in Houston, and that we want to see that this is going somewhere where people who are walking have the same, we are making sure that they have a safe and comfortable place to walk. So be aware, we're talking about this more in the Code of Ordinances and in the IDM. And you know, this, I've tried to summarize this. This looks a little complicated, but what I really wanted to emphasize here is that the sidewalks, you really need to think early and often about them. That because now a lot of this is handled under the Code of Ordinances, that's just walking you through here. These specific ordinances, you apply to new and real built sidewalks with certain characteristics. And now the sidewalk plans actually have to be submitted to the planning department, and the planning department in coordination with Public Works has set up what we call a sidewalk modifications committee. And so because the ordinances supersede the IDM, although the IDM has these standards, any variances with the IDM will have to go through this modification process. And if this can happen, this conversation can start early, and I recommend that it does. If you are working on a development in the planning stage, you can begin having these conversations with the planning department and with your the planners who are helping with planning. If you're doing roadway projects, think about the sidewalk early, and if there's going to need to be a variance, work with the permitting center who will connect you with the sidewalk modifications committee. Because now it is not as simple as just getting an IDM variance. You actually have to satisfy the requirements of the Code of Ordinances. And what we've tried to do is really make this simple to unify them as easily as possible. Basically what the sidewalk committee will do is they'll work with, if there's ever any time where there's a sidewalk with question, or you can't get it all in, or there's just not enough right of way, or there's open ditches or something, there's something out there, they'll work with you to define different alternatives that you can consider for how to build that sidewalk, if there's other materials you can use or the other layouts you can use. And then they really have ultimate authority to allow the design continue or not, or to work through other variations of a sidewalk design. And my last slide here, I just wanted to point you to Mushin Fong. She's one of our planners who is really tied in with the walkable places and transit-oriented development ordinances in Chapter 40 and Chapter 42. Because the IDM is having to work so closely with that Code of Ordinance, if you have any questions that related to, am I going to be breaking the law or not, Mushin and the planning department are probably a very good place to reach out to, although we in Public Works would be happy to help out as well. So Luis, that is all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, Ian, we do have some questions that have come in. Give me a second here so I can gather those up for you.
Sure thing.
Okay, one of the questions that we have here is if I can't fit the required sidewalk width, do I need a variance? And where does the variance come from? Public Works or the Planning Department?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it really can, if you're to the point where you're submitting designs through the city engineer's office or through an interagency group or any of that, work with them. Really, it'll start through a variance with Public Works, and then internally we will coordinate that with the Sidewalk Modifications Committee. But basically, if you were designing a sidewalk at this point, a long roadway or just with one single development, most of those, if they're not to standard, will have to go through the Sidewalk Modifications Committee. So it can go through Planning Department or Public Works depending on where you are in your process.
Okay, Ian. I have another question here. Do sidewalks requirements apply within city ETJ?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think about that. It's kind of a more general question, I'd say. Does the IDM apply to ETJ? And Louise, that's a good question. Do you have a better answer for that, Louise?
I would say that, you know, any project that's a City of Houston project has to abide by the requirements for the city. When it comes to ETJ, I guess I'm going to be assuming this, but I would assume each service line, you know, decides on a project basis. Is that fair to say? Everyone on the team?
I think that's more or less right. That really wherever the IDM applies, the sidewalks are no different, and particularly, and I don't think it would apply. We can look into that a little bit more. I know the Code of Ordinance itself only applies. Well, let me just stop there. I'm pretty sure it only will apply within the city of Houston.
I say, Ian, maybe we'll reach out across the city and just, you know, verify this to give a more complete answer.
Okay, yeah, good idea.
Okay, I have another question here. Does that clearance buffer apply regarding fire hydrants and traffic signal boxes?
I'm guessing, is that the safety buffer or the visibility buffer maybe? I would say anything can fit if we can make the case that you can see around it. For the most part, for the visibility buffer coming out of a driveway, you don't want too much stuff in the way, because a signal box and trees and benches and other things that are all in tandem can block something, but maybe just one piece of equipment could fit. And generally speaking, in the safety buffer, which is that part along the street between the sidewalk and the roadway, absolutely, that is the space that is intended for all these other kinds of uses, including utilities and signal equipment.
Okay, Ian. I think our time for this part of the presentation is up. We'll move on to the next presentation. The next part of the presentation will be presented by me, Luis Garza, the Office of the City Engineer Standards and Specifications. Some minor edits were done for Division 1 specifications, even though they were not part of this review cycle. As a reminder, the new specifications can be identified by the year in the header as shown on this slide. To aid in keeping track of these edits to standard specifications, we have added a summary of revisions made this review cycle. You will also see a summary listed for 2020. Our intention is to keep these lists in these documents for a 5-year cycle to supply record updates through one full 5-year review of all HPW's specs. This list also provides the standard details that were updated. Let's focus on the specifications list. The spec updates are broken down into 3 categories: new specifications, specifications with major updates, and specifications that have been retired. The specs with major updates category means the changes were made based on the review cycle coordination and external comments. They may not be large amount of changes in the spec. However, the changes are not administrative. The standards and specs group scan through all the standard specifications to find errors such as title errors, misspelling, and others that were identified over the past year. Those items were also updates, but not considered major updates. This year, there were no standard supplementary specifications executed. Therefore, no standards were updated due to supplements. Due to the amount of presenters in this presentation, I will only share a couple of spec updates. As a whole hour presentation could be made on these changes alone. Similar to what was stated earlier for IDM redlines, specification redlines have been posted on the City of Houston Design and Construction Standards website for reference. Redlines are available for the specifications that receive major revisions. As stated earlier in the earlier slides, redlines for minor changes have not been provided. Also, please note that the 2019 through the 2020 standard specifications will remain online for reference for construction projects that were bid using those specifications. The link to those specifications can be found on the Design and Construction Standards website under the Construction Specifications tab. As a part of improving the city standards, it was decided to move away from the AASHTO HS20 loading criteria and require LRFD HL93 AASHTO loading criteria. Almost all documents have been updated to be consistent. For example, major revisions to the submersible lift stations guidelines are being undergone. Thus, HS20 has not been updated in that document. Items such as manhole covers, which are to conform to HS20 loading according to AASHTO M306, shall be designed according to that governing document. A new addition to 2114 are this spec, the disinfection of water lines has been added. The addition gives procedures for chlorine disinfection for connections and or repairs to existing mains less than or equal to 50 feet in length. When directed by the project manager, the procedures for disinfection swabbing are to be as followed. This was added to bring greater clarity on the expectations of the city. Over the past couple of years, the Standards and Specs Group has been working with Stormwater Maintenance Branch and TDO on overhauling their precast stormwater manhole inlets and other associated details. During the first phase on precast concrete manholes, it was determined that modifications to the 02082 spec needed to be made to comply with the new standard details we had worked on. Both the Standards and Specs Group and Stormwater Maintenance Branch worked with many external stakeholders and experts such as the National Precast Concrete Association and the Texas Concrete Pipe Association to improve this document. Updates to the spec were made specifically for stormwater manholes. Therefore, you will see new articles that apply only to stormwater. Of the many to mention, two should be stormwater manholes will now prohibit mortar to be used at connections between pipes and manholes. Also, foundation material shall be selected by the engineer of record and geotechnical engineer. The engineer of record is to provide the foundation material selected in the drawings. As stated earlier, it'd be best to read through the red lines to understand all of the updates to construction specifications in the 2021 edition. With the help of others in the Office of the City Engineer, Ross Ozuna in OCE Standards and Specs Group analyzed 4 years of capital improvement project spec data to identify specifications that could be retired. It was identified that the 16,717 spec programmable vehicle data had not been used in 4 years by the city. The Houston Public Works owners of that spec were identified, and it was confirmed that the spec should be earmarked for retirement. Thus, the spec is retired and is not provided in the 2021 edition of the construction specifications. The Standards and Specs Group hopes to continue this type of analysis of our standard documents in an effort to streamline the city's requirements. That concludes this portion of the presentation. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat at this time.
All right, thanks, Luis. First question. Were there brand new specifications created this review cycle?
The answer to that question is yes. We had, along with the details that you'll be talking about here in a second, Ross, there are 3 new specifications that were created in this review cycle. They're all related to water lines. We have a new spec on large diameter line stops. We have another specification on insertion valves and line stops, and also a third spec on conductive trace wire for non-metallic waterline pipes.
Thanks, Luis. Another question. Can I reuse city specs I have used on a project I worked and completed last year?
The answer to that, Ross, is the city's post updates to our specifications and standard details yearly. So it's not recommended to use your specs from an old project that you worked on previously. Really, everyone should be using the most up-to-date standards, and those standards are found on our website, and so they should be using those up-to-date standards.
Okay, thanks, Luis. Looks like we can move on now. That's the end of the questions. I believe the next presenter is myself, so. All right. So I'll get started on presenting the detail updates. As part of our work on the modifications to Chapter 7 and 8 of the IDM, the City of Houston updated and modified the wastewater and water details. As part of the initiative to phase out brick manholes, the City of Houston has also updated stormwater details. In summary, we have revised 11 details. We've added 5 new details and removed 4. Drawing content changes have been tracked with revision clouds. A set of clouded revised drawings are available on our website under the Standards Review Committee sidebar, shown here. You can download them by navigating to the bottom of the page under Standard Details Red Lines Review Cycle. Updates on these drawings will be indicated with revision clouds. So look for those as you're flipping through the drawings, and that will summarize what has changed. Within the Standards Review Committee, the City of Houston had 9 revised and 3 new details within City of Houston water. Shown here, wastewater resulted in 2 revised details, and stormwater resulted in 2 new details and 4 details that had been removed. The executive summary will sum this up. It's showing the boxes in red here. That can be found in the IDM and spec book. The 3 new standard details are for trace wire on non-metallic pipes on water lines for Houston Water. The trace wire standard details were created to go along with the new specifications created this review cycle. First one here. Second one. Third. The The City of Houston will be removing standard brick manhole details beginning October 2021. Going forward, projects that have brick manholes will need to have them replaced with precast manholes. So in this detail, y'all might be familiar with these notes across the drawings. Well, in 2021, that will take effect. We will be retiring this sheet. The new precast manhole details will replace them with new detail numbers 2081-12 and 2082-13, which is a precast round manhole and a precast box manhole, respectively. The City of Houston Public Works created these details in collaboration with external agencies such as TxDOT, Texas Concrete Pipe Association, National Precast Concrete Association, and the Houston Contractors Association. The TxDOT Standards Inlet and Manhole Program, known as the SIMP, served as the design basis for the drawings. Another major update can be seen here on the large diameter waterline tunnel and casing detail. So this is the old 2020 detail shown on screen. Here is the new 2021 detail, providing more design information and a new installation method. A third installation method has been added. So that concludes the big standard detail updates and the presentation. If you have any questions, please submit them now.
Ross, I think that you both, I think between you and I answered, may have answered one of the questions that was asked earlier. They were asking when the manhole drawings were going to be published.
So the new drawings, the precast ones, will take effect October 1st. Any project submitted after that will need to use the precast drawings, and the brick ones will be taken offline. So going forward after October 1st, any brick manholes on projects, if the scope of work includes that brick manhole, it will need to be replaced with a precast manhole going forward. So there won't be a grandfathering in a sense that way. Thanks, Louise.
Give me a second, Ross. I'm taking a look to see if there were any other questions here. I think I can answer this particular question. When will you update all the inlet details? Do you have any timeline? At the moment, we're working with the stormwater maintenance branch to start looking into these inlet details. At the moment, that timeline has not been set. There's another question here. Can we use the new drawings now? And Ross, I think I'll also take this this question. In our executive summary, we give some more background on when the dates and when these drawings are effective. And in that executive summary, it gives that recommendation is that for phase 2 final designs that have already been submitted for a required review prior to October 1st, it is recommended that all designers make an effort to incorporate the new changes into their current design to the extent that it does not increase costs or delay a project.
Thank you for that, Luis.
There's a question here: is the city allowing cast-in-place manholes for storm sewers? I think at this time we'll need to reach out to our colleagues there in transportation and drainage operations, and we'll get back to you on that question.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, Ross, I don't really see too many different.
Regarding past in place, you know, the spec 2081 has not changed this review cycle, Luis, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So
but I think that the preference,
question.
I think if our colleagues in the transportation and drainage operations have a preference on a particular project, I think they'll be working with them directly to find that out, on which one is applicable for that particular project. But yes, you're correct. We did not retire or change the cast in place spec.
Mm-hmm. And another note on that, if we have time here, I believe the round manholes are only going up to 8-foot diameter on the standard detail sheet. So. If there's no questions though, like, we can get going. I don't have anything else to add, Luis.
Okay. Okay. So from here, let's move on to the closing of this presentation. So as discussed earlier, I wanted to bring this up again. The changes that we've presented are effective October 1st. And when it comes to these changes, you know, there's an exception to this, and that exception is the updates to Chapter 9 for the public-private sector projects. You must submit your substantially completed plans prior to that deadline to be grandfathered under the 2020 requirements. But the exception to this date were those updates due to Chapter 9, since those came from the IDM supplements that were already accepted and approved by the director in Houston Public Works. And to just give some more background here, for capital improvement projects, you know, this 90-day design grace period will be given for Houston Public Works capital improvement projects managed by the Capital Project Service Line. Phase 2 final designs that have not been submitted for a required review prior to October 1st will be required to completely comply with the new IDM requirements. So in essence, if you haven't submitted your project for one of those required reviews yet, you will have to comply with the new IDM requirements. For the public and private sector, also a 90-day design grace period will be given for projects in the public and private sector. Plans submitted for initial review after October 1st, 2021 will be required to comply with the new infrastructure design manual. And as stated just here a few seconds earlier, you know, you must submit your plans. They have to be substantially complete, and they have to be submitted before October 1st for them to be grandfathered in to that 2020 IDM requirements. For additional background and for more information on this, refer to the 2021 IDM announcement and IDM executive summary. The IDM summary is provided at the beginning of the IDM document and gives implementation information for standard specifications and standard details as well. Before we proceed to the final Q&A, let's briefly touch on items in the works for the standards group and the content to be reviewed in the 2021 and 2022 review cycle. At the beginning of 2021, the city's CAD tools were updated. A new color table CTB file was uploaded along with a new line type file and standard symbol sheet. To view those tools, visit the standards and specs website. Under development, we're currently working with building code enforcement here at HPC to update our parking space requirements for off-street parking. We're working to bring more clarity to those standard details. Also under development, we're working with the Houston Public Works Planning Department to bring additional guidance to the IDM on handling of historical blue tile street signs that are located in curb returns across the city. Keep your eyes peeled for that update, as it may come before next year's IDM release. And on the horizon, and as discussed earlier, we also plan to continue our efforts on improving our stormwater standard details by focusing on precast inlets. So from there, we can talk a little bit about the 2021-2022 review cycle. August is the beginning of the new review cycle. The 2021-2022 review cycle will cover chapters 1 through 5 and chapter 13 along with the related specifications and standard details. That means the general survey, graphic platting easement requirements, and GIS data digitization standards will undergo review along with all related specifications and standard details. For more detail on that, head over to the Standards and Specs Group's website, because the public notice and proposed comment form have been posted. Both city employees and public can submit your comments to the Standards Review Committee inbox. This year's open comment period is from August 5th through September 30th. The 2022 IDM publication is estimated to be July 1st, 2022. That said, I'll open it up to additional questions. Please type them in the chat.
Luis, there is no questions so far on the closing.
Okay.
Well, excuse me, there is one here. Where can I find the 2021 IDM announcement webpage?
The 2021 IDM announcement webpage, the easiest way to find that is if you go to the Houston Permitting Center website. There's a banner on the main page. If you click on the banner, it'll take you to that announcement. So Ross, while we're waiting for more questions here, I think we can go and talk about some of the previous, or ask some of those previous asked questions. So is Venus Price by any chance still on the line here?
Yes.
Hi, Venus. I have a question here. The question is, for multi-phase developments, almost always require temporary dead-end lines that will be extended in subsequent projects. Is there any consideration for this in the new requirements? This requirement.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this requirement may have the unintended consequence of requiring a lot of extra water lines that would not normally be installed if the developments were constructed all at once.
All right, so very good question. I would say there's consideration always for everything. We try not to be black and white, but I will tell you the problem for us is these multi-phases can't always be relied on, and it's unknown how much time it will take from phase one to the next phase. So we've been brought up on that issue a couple of times recently, and I will say it really will need to be on a case-by-case basis. The rule will stand that dead ends are not allowed. So in both the cases that we brought in, we were actually able to find a solution where they could connect to something, or some other reasonable resolution. So it's a good question. I wish I could tell you definitively yes or no or whatever. Unfortunately, that's just not it's not practical. Every project's a little bit different.
Okay, Venus. There was another question that was asked during your presentation. Are as-built requirements same or different than in the contract?
Also another good question. So the engineer's role is defined in the contract, and it's been some time since I've read those contracts, but in my day, it used to be very understood that the EOR, needed to kind of take those those as-built in hand because they would be doing up the CAD work. I believe that the language that we put into the IDM is just providing detail to the work that's already in the contract. But I will admit that it's been some time since I read those contracts. So if you guys think that, you know, this really needs to be revisited and or maybe moved from the IDM into the contract, definitely send that comment in. It's something we will look at. Thanks.
Venus, here's another question. I think that we can probably answer this pretty easily. Is there a minimum size of tracer wire? Or maybe, let's see, I saw the tracer wire spec is shown as 16124. I think both of us might say to refer to the tracer wire spec for all tracer wire requirements. Is that fair to say, Venus?
Yes, that's true. And again, I would like to say we really encourage these kinds of questions. If you see some things that you feel like you want to ask, send them in. And we might not be able to get to it right away because of review cycles or whatever, but maybe we can't. Maybe you've caught something that there now needs to be a standard supplement for. So we really encourage you guys and appreciate you guys looking at this stuff in depth. I think it makes us all stronger for work we have to do in the right way.
Venus, there's another question here. What is the clearance for abandoned lines? That might have been a longer question that was summarized earlier.
I think what the asker or the questioner is meaning to ask is for lines that are to be abandoned, not already abandoned. I think that might make more sense to me, and I think that that is not defined to my recollection anywhere, but I would assume, again, in my day, what we did is we understood that the existing line has to stay very much in service until the new line is tested and all services transferred and whatnot. So we had to maintain proper clearances from the line to be abandoned as if it was another existing utility that was in service. So water line to water line separation would still be a minimum of 1 foot vertical and 4 feet horizontal. I think that's sound practice, just to make sure you don't break apart the existing water line while you're trying to put in a new one. But if that is not your question, please feel free to reach back for other clarification and or, you know, just submit your comments through OCE so we can have another look, and perhaps you found an opportunity for us to clarify the language further. Thank you.
Venus, here's one more on the tracer wire. I think maybe we'll move on to another chapter just so we can get some coverage on the questions. This one is what minimum water line sizes require tracer wires? All sizes?
The minimum water line size that's allowable is 6 inch. So yeah, all sizes. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Ian Lavacek, are you anybody by any chance still on the line with us?
I am.
Hi, Ian. If we had a question here, where safety buffer is used for equipment, but what minimum distance for the vertical features from the face of curb? Is there a minimum distance?
So I'm trying to picture that in my head, like if there's a big utility box or something, it's vertical, different signs and posts and that kind of thing. We don't really deal with that in this chapter. We have not defined that within the pedestrian realm requirements. There might be something from chapter 10. I had to refresh my memory. We might just have to get back to you on that one, but we don't specifically deal with that here in chapter 17.
Okay. There's another question here for sidewalk side paths. Does the 1 foot minimum frontage buffer have to be grass, or can it be concrete like the safety buffer?
The frontage buffer, good point. The question was about the frontage buffer?
Yeah, it says, does the 1 foot minimum frontage buffer have to be grass, or can it be concrete like the safety buffer?
It can also be concrete. And what we're trying to do is to make sure we have a a minimum space that is the sidewalk where people can get around, and then they have the ability to have that space that's also offset from the property line. If it's paved, that still is a space that is provided to them in addition to the walking space. So that can also be paved, yes.
Okay. So from here, I think I have one question here. Thank you, Ian and Venus. We have a question for Chapter 9. Kathleen, if you're still here. When we were starting water surface, sorry, when were the starting water surface and hydraulic gradient requirements changed in 9.2.01C5?
Okay. That requirement in there was changed when Joe Meyer was still with us, so it's 2019. So that's 2019's publication is already in there.
Okay, I think that answers that question. It looks like we're running out of time at the moment, so we'll just move on to the last few slides here and completely close this presentation. If you have additional questions, please send them to our inbox at hpwstandards@houstontech.gov. We'll be posting a recording of the webinar a few days after this event. Head over to our website, use the IDM tab and scroll down to the video links. They will be posted under the IDM webinar heading. Thank you for joining us. We hope this was informative. Thank you to all the presenters for all their hard work and all the hard work that they did over the entire review cycle. Thank you, it's much appreciated. Take care, and we hope to see you again next year.